What is the worst second-hand embarrassment you've ever felt? Askreddit, A55A55IN100997. Was at dinner party when my friend's mother-in-law asked another one of our friends when her baby was due. She wasn't pregnant. Anyway, Mills should have simply apologized, but instead doubles down with something to the effect of, "It sure looks like you're pregnant." Beneficial salt 6773, 9649. Or went to an Italian restaurant once with someone who was learning Italian and knew quite a bit. None of the staff were Italian. It was essentially just a pizzeria in a small town. She insisted on ordering for the whole table, in the language with the correct pronunciation, etc. Waitress was like 17 and didn't have a clue what was happening whilst we all just sat there. Scotch Toekberfest 7277. At that time my old roommate told a table full of his family that AIDS and cancer are the same thing, just after talking about how much he's been learning from his night classes. Those classes were being paid for by his parents, and spoiler alert, he wasn't attending any classes. They realized it by the time dinner was over. CPT Murphy 27, 5808. Was going down an escalator at the Mall of Georgia when the 90-something-year-old guy in front of me very suddenly shit his pants. We were about 500 feet from a bathroom and he was wearing shorts. I felt so bad for him. My dad gave him his hoodie to wrap around his waist. I was very proud he was my dad in that moment. And still am. Dave the Peanut, 10793. A colleague of mine put in his 2 weeks. For context, he's a fairly attractive man. Well, this woman from HR, of all places, comes by his cubicle to wish him well, I guess? Anyway, she basically gives him a lap dance right there in front of the whole office. Buckus 93, 11181. A girl graduating from college falling down repeatedly on the stage. She fell at least 3 or 4 times and it was like something invisible was sweeping her leg out from under her. Even she had a WTF expression on her face. Smile_terrible. 11722. I was a server at an Americana restaurant and a family came in and the mother was berating everyone. She yelled at the server and complained about the food not being the right temperature, and then she thought it was too salty, etc. She really had it in for the 17-year-old server. He was fine, but the customer wanted to pick at someone. Her husband and teenage children looked embarrassed. She had been like this before. There is a sign on the door that said we reserved the right to refuse service to anyone. And management decided that this lady shouldn't eat with us again, so the manager went over and comped the meals and told them to leave and not come back. The woman was upset and left mean feedback. In response the feedback, a regular posted with a picture of the woman and her family. She quickly took down her bad feedback. She deserved the public upbraiding. But I was embarrassed for her family. Outrageous_emu 8503, 5507. I was selling some kettlebells on Facebook Marketplace and a woman, early 40s maybe, bought them. She came to pick them up and as I handed them over to her, she obviously wasn't expecting them to be as heavy as they were. And as she suddenly strained to counter the weight, she ripped the most extreme of farts you have ever heard. It was gargantuan. I was shocked, but also proud. I'm usually pretty good at making light of any situation, but I found myself speechless for the first time in my life. If I could, I would have returned serve, but even on my best day I don't believe I could create such a symphony. We both kind of stared into each other's eyes and she said, "Well," and turned around and walked off. I think about her often. No_difficulty_3203, 5292. What's a good sign someone was raised right? Askreddit, slow 83 burn 84. Or, not littering, politeness to service workers, and civic knowledge. Proud_professional 93, 888. Cleaning up after themselves. 4R 7 years 7, 4837. They admit when they're wrong. Lingua_frankly, 12,057. Cleaning up after themselves in public place like movie theaters. San Anioglam, 9878. I was working at a grocery store gas station in Arizona during the height of the pandemic. One summer night, a customer came in and pointed out an elderly man sitting in a wheelchair near the back of the building. Long story short, it is obvious that he was dumped there. He was far away from the assisted living facility where he was staying. Had no idea where he was. And given the fact that it was 110 degrees, it was lucky that he was alive. That lady who alerted us to him. She stayed the entire time. Helped figure out where he was from. He didn't speak much English. And even called her kids to say, "Mom's not gonna be home for a while." She finally left after he'd been loaded into an ambulance and taken to the hospital almost 2 hours later. Whomever had dropped him off? Worst of humanity. This woman? She was raised right. Go Jack. 9650. When they wait for you to get in the house, building before they leave. Terrible 22, 7738. One time, I drunk dialed my ex and I called the wrong number. It was this sweet old guy and we talked for an hour about how I shouldn't call my ex and that I deserve better and how I just need to go to sleep and rest. I have no clue who this man is, but I think about him often. He was a great human. McCreasy. 5958. They are polite to minimum wage workers. Lily_Puff, 2008. What meal from your childhood did you hate the most? Askreddit, Irish 2685. My dad was not the cook. But when he had to, his fallback was taco salad. It was simple and it was good. But we had it so much. It became tedious and didn't want it anymore. I haven't had it in years and it's now the family joke. He has recently passed and what I wouldn't give for some taco salad. The Mode Fanatic. 3400. My dad was a stay-at-home dad. No hate to actual SAH parents. My dad just paraded as one really well. When my mom went out of town for work, he gave us a choice of 3 canned foods for meals. Creamed corn, pork and beans, or SpaghettiOs with Franks. I hate every single one of those. After multiple tearful protests, I was finally permitted to get plain SpaghettiOs. And thank God for that day. I met one of my cousins for the first time a few years ago. We come from an estranged family. And he mentioned the same 3 choices as meals as a child whenever his mother wasn't cooking dinner. So anyway, that's how I learned my father's childhood was like Lord of the Flies. Katie_Fabe. 1829. My mom used to make a meal that my dad supposedly loved. It was bean soup and it's exactly what you think it is. It's a bunch of cooked beans with minimal seasoning in water or broth and it was the meal equivalent of jury duty. Amthomas 101. 1078. Dry under-seasoned chicken breast. Aesthetic_Kiera. 2038. Broccoli. Few faithlessness 49. 223. My mom used to make this pasta with a thick flour and cream-based sauce. I always felt so sick afterwards. I found out in my mid-20s that I'm celiac and lactose intolerant. Asparagus large 6105. 893. My mom's shake and bake pork chops. Only the cheapest, most gristly cut. Baked until it was devoid of any moisture. My jaw hurts just thinking about trying to chew it. It wasn't until my 30s that I ordered a pork chop. at a restaurant and discovered pork chops can be juicy and delicious. Then I was reborn. Quote, Dear Aunt Agnes, 179. 9. Boiled vegetables. It was horrific. OK_stranger_5161, 870. What is a story you can't wait to tell your children when they are old enough? Askreddit. LS 19,962,010. A couple years back I was charged by a deer on my gravel bicycle, and basically left for dead in the middle of nowhere and in the middle of the night. 40 miles from home. My bike was so fucked that the front wheel was hitting the bent down tube. So I had to use a fallen tree and some leverage to bend it back. My whole left torso was a gigantic bruise from nailing my drop bar's end with my hip. And I was covered in deer hair because when I went over the bars it broke my fall. Totally gnarly. Could have been far worse. And that's why we wear helmets. Bcron. 1612. I tackled someone robbing my store and got him arrested. Edit. A store I worked at. Probably shouldn't have and was dumb in hindsight, but what can I say, instincts took over lol. I also have a video of it to look back on. Editex too. It's on my profile. Aries 4217. 773. 70. The stuff you learn about in history is what your grandparents and great-grandparents had to go through, and it's not that long ago. ADIDAS 247. 643. That there's food at home. Specialist Top 406. 369. How great of a grandmother they would have had. Love and miss you everyday mom. Sweatpants Joe 420. 373. 3. I don't have kids, but I make sure the next generation knows that their grandfather, the son of an immigrant, was Ike's secretary during the war. Eyes only clearance. Where he met my mother. Also eyes only clearance. Drafting maps for Ike and Roosevelt. She had come from the Dust Bowl. Years later she was on one of the last commercial flights out of Saigon. Not because she was afraid of the VC, but because the company was out of business. And how I delivered pizzas from the Delta to the DMZ. Yugon Dolly. 196. That they were born without kneecaps. It really freaked me out when I learned they are born without them and don't develop them until they are 3 to 6. Christopheron. 84. 8. When my oldest was little, he was super into giving candy out to trick-or-treaters on Halloween. When he was 4, we went out to get candy too, of course. But afterwards he was excited to hand candy out and guess the costumes. We live on a cul-de-sac and it rained that year, so we only got a couple trick-or-treaters and he was heartbroken. So I grabbed a bunch of old costumes from the attic and some old sheets, and snuck out the basement door around the front of the house and came to the door several times dressed as another character, hiding my face. My son was so excited to give out more candy. I had to literally bite my tongue from chuckling. Then I went to the neighbor across the street that had a teenage son, who had all his friends over for a party. I asked them if they would come and get candy from my son. No costumes required. He just wanted to give candy. They happily obliged, cleaned us out, and everyone was happy. Illustrious Science 3. 83.